The billing office at Hargrove Memorial had the kind of lighting that made everyone look tired. White walls, plastic chairs bolted in rows of 4, a single potted fern in the corner that hadn't been watered since anyone could remember. Marcus Webb had been sitting in chair number 3 since 8 that morning. It was now past 2 in the afternoon. He had no coat. He'd given it away 6 hours earlier to an elderly woman shivering on the bench outside the main entrance. He hadn't thought twice. That was who Marcus Webb was, though no one in that building had bothered to find out. He held a folder in his lap. Inside, 2 insurance denial letters, a cardiologist's report, a pair of bank statements, and a patient assistance application he had filled out by hand and submitted 3 weeks ago, from which he had heard nothing. He had also brought a photograph of his daughter, Lily. He wasn't sure why. He just needed her close. Director Sandra Marsh, per the nameplate angled outward on her desk like a small territorial claim, had not looked at him once since waving him sideways into the chair beside her. She was typing with considerable conviction. When she finally looked up, her expression said she had a full afternoon and this was already running over. "Mr. Webb," she said, "your daughter's procedure." "Yes. The insurance denial stands. If you already feel it, that tightening in your chest, hit the like button and subscribe to Hidden Ledger. Drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Because this story is just getting started. And the part they don't see coming? Keep watching." Marcus placed the folder on the edge of her desk, carefully, the way a man places something he knows might be pushed aside but places it anyway, because not placing it would mean accepting that it was already over. "There's a patient assistance fund. I submitted an application 3 weeks ago. The current funding cycle is closed." Director Marsh said this the way people say things they've said 100 times and stopped thinking about. "Allocations happen at the beginning of each quarter. My daughter's condition has changed since I filed. Her cardiologist sent an updated report last Thursday. If someone could look at the new timeline." "Mr. Webb," she said his name with a period after it, the kind meant to close the sentence for both of them. "I understand this is a difficult situation, but we cannot make exceptions to the funding process for every family that..." "I'm not asking for an exception." He opened the folder and turned it toward her. "I'm asking someone to read a letter. 7 pages. It explains why the schedule has changed." Director Marsh looked at the folder, then at Marcus, at the work shirt with the small tear at the left cuff, at the chair beside him where a coat should have been, at the man who had been sitting in her waiting room since 8 in the morning and apparently intended to keep sitting there. "Leave the file," she said. "Someone will review it and follow up by mail." Marcus closed the folder. He thanked her, genuinely, which was the part that was hardest to explain, and walked back to chair number 3. He sat. He looked at the photograph of Lily. She was 9 years old. She had a gap between her front teeth that she was missing now because the permanent teeth had finally come in, and he had cried alone in his car the morning he noticed the gap was gone, because her mother had loved that gap and never got to see what replaced it. Lily had hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a thickening of the heart muscle that, if untreated, could trigger sudden cardiac arrest. She'd been diagnosed 14 months ago, 6 months after her mother died of a brain aneurysm at 33. The world, Marcus had thought more than once, had no sense of proportion. The procedure she needed cost $62,000. His insurance had denied it twice, classifying it as elective, a word that had apparently been assigned by people who had never sat across from a cardiologist explaining what happened when the wrong muscle grew too dense. Marcus earned $41,000 a year in facilities management at a distribution center. He had $3,100 in savings. His car had 193,000 miles on it, and a transmission that sometimes hesitated before agreeing to cooperate. He had Lily. He had the folder. He had chair number 3. He had been polite every time, every call, every form, every waiting room, because being anything other than polite would give someone a reason to stop taking his calls, and he could not afford for anyone to stop taking his calls. The 3 weeks since the second denial had been a particular kind of exhausting. He had made 11 phone calls during his lunch breaks at the distribution center, standing in the parking lot with his back against the building so the wind didn't eat the words. He had written 2 appeal letters, both of which were returned with the same form language about clinical criteria. He had read the patient assistance guidelines on the hospital's website so many times he could have recited the eligibility categories from memory, and he knew, with the certainty of someone who had read the same document 11 times, that Lily qualified. The discretionary provision existed. It said so in black text on a gray background. Paragraph 4, subsection B. What it did not say was who controlled access to that provision, or why that person kept telling him the cycle was closed. He had been asking that question quietly for 3 weeks. He was still asking it. Above the fern on the far wall, slightly crooked, hung a framed photograph of a man in a dark suit at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. A brass plate beneath, James Caldwell, founding benefactor, Caldwell Medical Group. The man in the photograph was smiling the way someone smiles when something they built is finally standing in the world. Marcus had passed that photograph 3 times today. He had not thought about it until now. The morning had started before the sun. He woke at 5:15, made Lily's lunch, peanut butter and honey, crusts cut off. Not because she asked, but because it was habit, and habits were the scaffolding of a household with one parent and no margin for error, and drove her to his neighbor Mrs. Petrov's apartment before 7. Lily, buckled into the back seat, asked whether the doctors were going to fix her heart today. He said not today, sweetheart. He said he was going to talk to people who were working on it. She absorbed this with the careful composure of a 9-year-old who had learned that adults sometimes said working on it when they meant I don't know yet. She had become very good at reading the space between what he said and what he meant. It was one of the things about her that made him proudest, and one of the things that broke his heart. Dad, she said, as he was closing the car door. Yeah, you're cold. Where's your coat? I run warm. He didn't run warm. He would tell her the story later, and she would ask for it again after that, because it was exactly the kind of story Lily wanted to hear twice. The drive to Hargrove Memorial took 22 minutes. He arrived at 7:42, crossed from the parking structure into the cold, and that was when he saw her. She sat on the wooden bench outside the main entrance. An elderly woman, perhaps 78 or 80, wearing a gray wool coat that looked expensive and was clearly not enough. She held a small purse in both hands and watched the street with the deliberate patience of someone who had been waiting longer than she expected and had decided not to let it show. She shivered in small, controlled intervals that she appeared to be actively managing, as if shivering were an indulgence she had not agreed to. Marcus almost kept walking. He had a folder to hold and an 8 o'clock appointment, and 100 things weighing behind his eyes. He stopped. Ma'am, are you all right? She looked up. Her eyes were dark and precise, not the eyes of someone who frightened easily. I'm perfectly fine, thank you. My driver is running a few minutes late. It's 40 degrees. She smiled, with the particular patience of a woman who had outlived many inconveniences. I've been cold before. Marcus set his folder on the bench. He took off his coat, the good one, the only one without a tear, and laid it across her shoulders without making a production of it. She stared at him. You can't give me your coat. You're shivering, he said. I run warm. Something in her expression shifted. Not surprise exactly, but a recalibration, the way someone adjusts when they encounter something that doesn't fit their expectation of the morning. She pulled the coat closer and didn't argue. They sat together on the bench. The cold found him through his shirt sleeves almost immediately, but he didn't show it. She asked about his visitor badge. He told her about Lily. Briefly, the way he had learned to say it over 14 months, without asking for anything in return, just answering honestly because she genuinely asked. Heart condition. 9 years old. Meeting with billing today to try to sort out the funding. She listened without the distracted nod people gave when they were waiting for you to finish so they could respond. She was actually listening, the way someone listens when they are storing what you say. Her mother, Eleanor asked, passed away 18 months ago. He said it plainly, the way he had learned to say it so the other person didn't feel they had to manage their reaction. Brain aneurysm. No warning. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. My husband, she said, also without warning. 11 years ago. She looked at the street. You learn to carry what you're given. You do, Marcus said. They sat with that for a minute, 2 people on a cold bench in the early morning who had each been handed something heavy and had kept walking anyway. Her car arrived 6 minutes later, a black sedan, the driver out of breath and apologetic. Eleanor rose carefully, and Marcus steadied her arm before she could ask. At the car door, she turned back toward him. She held out his coat. He took it, but before he could put it back on, she pressed his hand briefly. Not dramatically, just for a second, The way you press someone's hand when words are the wrong size for what you mean. Thank you, she said. The way she said it held more than the words. He watched the car ease away from the curb. Then he picked up his folder and went inside. He did not get her name. He did not know that Eleanor Caldwell, 78 years old, was in town for 2 days to tour the cardiac research wing her son had built and named for her late husband, Dr. Harold Caldwell. He did not know that James Caldwell, the man in the photograph above the fern, had spent 30 years building Caldwell Medical Group into a network of 17 hospitals across 9 states, that it was the largest privately held hospital network in the region, and that the discretionary fund Marcus had been told was closed had a balance of $4.3 million. He did not know that Eleanor, before the black sedan reached the end of the block, had asked her driver to get James on the phone. He went to chair number 3. He opened his folder. He waited. The waiting room had its own slow rhythm. People came and left. A child across the room colored in a workbook with a focus that Marcus admired. A woman near the window spoke quietly on her phone in a language he didn't recognize, rubbing the back of her own hand as she talked. Around 10 o'clock, a man in a gray uniform stopped beside Marcus's chair. He was perhaps 60, carrying a clipboard and a small paper cup of water. "You've been here a while," the man said. It wasn't an accusation or a question, just an observation from someone who paid attention to things. "A while," Marcus agreed. The man set the cup on the arm of the chair and moved on without waiting to be thanked. He had other chairs to check. Marcus drank the water. He didn't know the man's name. He noted the face, the unhurried way he moved through the room, the fact that he had noticed and acted without ceremony. Marcus had spent his whole working life alongside people like that, the people who kept the lights on and the hallways clean and the machines running, who showed up early and stayed late and were mostly invisible to the people who ran things. He thought about what it meant to be seen by that kind of person. It was its own kind of reassurance. He went back to waiting. At noon, he stepped into the hallway and called Mrs. Petrov. Lily had eaten breakfast, Mrs. Petrov told him. She was watching television. She had asked once whether her dad had fixed everything yet. Mrs. Petrov had told her he was still working on it, which was the same thing Marcus had said, and which satisfied Lily to the same partial degree. He went back to chair number 3. If this story found its way to you, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Hidden Ledger posts new stories every week, and the one after this one is already waiting. Your support is what keeps the Ledger open. Director Marsh returned from what appeared to be a long lunch at 2:40. She moved through the office with the efficiency of someone who had learned that appearing busy was nearly as effective as being busy. She checked her inbox, signed something, picked up Marcus's folder, read 2 lines, and set it back down. Then she looked across the room at the man who had been in the same chair for nearly 7 hours. "Mr. Webb," her voice carried the distance without difficulty. "As I mentioned, the funding cycle. I understand." He was already standing. "I thought if I waited, maybe someone with more flexibility in the timeline." "There is no one with more flexibility." She said it cleanly. "The decision on your application is mine and it hasn't changed. We do have a financial counseling service for families managing," a pause, "situations like yours. I can leave that information for you." The pause was brief. The people in the waiting room heard it anyway. A billing clerk named Drea, 23 years old and 8 months into the job, looked up from her monitor. She looked at Marcus standing in the middle of the room with the folder. She looked at Director Marsh. She looked back at her monitor and typed something that wasn't urgent. Nobody spoke. Marcus held the folder at his side. He looked at Director Marsh for a moment, not with anger, just with the steady gaze of a man who had read the policy documents and knew what they said and wanted her to know that he knew. "The discretionary fund," he said quietly. Paragraph 4, subsection B. It explicitly covers cases where clinical status changes the eligibility window. Something moved across Director Marsh's face. Recognition, quickly smoothed over. "The fund administrator has to approve any discretionary case," she said. "That process takes time." "I've been waiting 3 weeks," Marcus said. "I'm willing to wait longer today, if that's what it takes." She looked at him for a moment, and in that moment he thought he saw something that wasn't authority, something closer to the discomfort of a person who knows they have the power to do something and has decided not to, and doesn't particularly want to be looked at directly while making that decision. "Leave the file," she said again. "We'll be in touch." Marcus held the folder at his side. He stood in the center of the office the way a man stands when he is deciding. Not whether to fight, but whether to let the room see that the fight wasn't finished. He decided not to let it. He said thank you. He turned toward the door. He was in the hallway when the atmosphere changed. Not a sound, a pressure. The institutional shift that happens in large buildings when someone significant moves through them. A cluster of footsteps with a different weight, and then a silence spreading ahead of it like a bow wave. Marcus turned. James Caldwell did not match the photograph. The photograph was a ceremony, a smile for the record. The man walking down the corridor was 61, silver-haired, moving with the deliberate quiet of someone who had stopped needing to demonstrate authority a long time ago. Two people flanked him, an administrator Marcus didn't recognize, and a woman on the phone speaking in a rapid, low voice. Neither looked at Marcus. James Caldwell did. He stopped outside the billing office door. He looked at the visitor badge, the folder, the missing coat. The man who had been standing in this hallway long enough for the light overhead to have shifted from morning to afternoon. Marcus Webb? He said. Marcus went still. Yes. James extended his hand. My mother called me this morning. She described a man who gave her his coat in the cold and told her about his daughter. He paused. She told me to find him. Down the corridor, a cartwheel squeaked and stopped. Marcus looked at the brass nameplate above the billing office door. The photograph on the wall inside. The man in front of him. She was shivering, Marcus said. That was all he had. James nodded once. I know. He looked past Marcus into the office, where Director Marsh had appeared in the doorway, with the expression of someone watching the ground rearrange itself beneath her feet. Let's go inside. What happened in the next 15 minutes was quiet and specific and complete. Director Marsh stood at the edge of her own office, while James Caldwell sat in chair number 3, Marcus's chair, the one she had been cycling people through all day, and read the file. He read the cardiologist's letter, all 7 pages. He turned back to page 3 at one point and reread a paragraph. He did not skim. When he finished, he set the folder down the same way Marcus had set it down. Carefully. The Caldwell Foundation Discretionary Fund, he said, still looking at the file, covers pediatric cardiac procedures when the standard assistance window has been affected by a documented change in clinical status. He set it to the folder, not to the room. That's been policy since 2019. Director Marsh drew a breath. The approval process for discretionary cases requires. Requires what? James looked up. She stopped. Because what it requires, he said, according to the policy I wrote, is a clinical update from the treating physician, a completed application, and a review by the fund administrator. He set the letter on the desk so it faced her. The physician update was received last Thursday. The application has been on file for 3 weeks. The fund administrator is in this room. A pause. What's the missing step? Director Marsh had the look of someone who had been very certain of the rules until the person who wrote them walked in. Open a new case under the discretionary fund, James said. Schedule the procedure this week. Coordinate directly with Dr. Kim's office. Today, if her surgical team has availability. Nobody spoke. He looked at Marsh. The denial history on this file. I'll want to review that process separately. All applications that moved through this office in the last 2 quarters. He didn't say, and you will be part of that review. He didn't need to. All of it. Drea, at her monitor, had her hands in her lap. James stood and looked at Marcus. The procedure is covered in full. No deposit. No payment plan. No further appeals. He glanced at the letter. Dr. Kim will hear from my office before end of business today. Marcus held the folder. He had been carrying it for 7 hours. He didn't know what to do with his hands without it. My daughter, she'll be seen this week. I've read the window. Marcus looked at Lily's photograph, still visible in the open folder. He thought about the bench, the gray coat, the way Eleanor had pulled it closer without arguing. He thought about how close he had come to walking past. There was a man, Marcus said quietly, earlier today, in the hallway outside this office. He brought me a cup of water this morning, when I'd been sitting here for a while. Gray uniform. I don't know his name. I wanted someone to know he was here. James looked at him for a moment. Then he turned to the administrator beside him and said something brief and quiet. The administrator nodded and stepped out. Raymond Osei had worked at Hargrove Memorial for 16 years. He would not know why a formal commendation appeared in his personnel file the following week, or why a modest pay increase arrived in January. He would mention it to his wife over dinner, and she would say that someone had finally been paying attention, and he would nod, and they would finish their meal, and that would be that. He kept bringing water to the people in the chairs. That was who he was, and the ledger remembered it, even when he didn't think anyone was watching. Lily's procedure was scheduled for Thursday morning. Marcus spent Wednesday at home with her. He made sandwiches, crusts off. They watched a documentary about ocean migration, and when the whale segment came on, Lily pressed herself against his side and stayed there, and he kept his arm around her, and neither of them said anything about Thursday until it was time for bed. That evening, after dinner, Lily asked him how whales knew where to go, whether someone told them or whether they just knew. He said he thought they just knew, that something inside them pointed the right direction. Lily was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I think my heart knows it's going to be okay." He looked at her. "Yeah? It's been trying really hard," she said, with the matter-of-fact tone she used when she was being serious about something. "I can tell." He pulled her closer. "You're right," he said. "It has." He held on for a moment longer than he meant to, and she let him, because she was 9 and she understood, without being able to name it, that sometimes a hug was for the parent more than the child. That night, he sat alone at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and thought about Eleanor Caldwell, about what it meant that she had genuinely listened, not waited politely, but actually received what he said, about the fact that she had called her son not because Marcus had asked for anything, but because she had paid attention to a stranger on a bench and held on to what he told her and done something with it. He thought about how invisible that kind of attention was, how rarely it got named. He thought about the bench, the coat, the 40-degree morning, how close he had come to walking past. He went to bed before midnight for the first time in months. Dr. Kim's team began at 6:30 Thursday morning. The procedure ran 3 hours and 12 minutes. Marcus sat in a padded waiting room down the hall and read the same paragraph of a magazine 11 times, and a nurse brought him coffee without being asked, and he thanked her with more sincerity than the occasion strictly required. At 11:30, Dr. Kim came through the door. She was smiling before she reached him. Lily woke in the early afternoon, groggy, pale, and the first thing she said was that the pillow smelled wrong. The second thing was that she was hungry. The third thing, eyes not quite fully open, was, "Dad, did it work?" It worked. She studied his face. She had been doing this since she was small, reading him for the difference between what adults said and what was true. She decided he was telling the truth. Without ceremony, she reached out and took his hand, which she hadn't done unprompted in a long time, because she was 9 and there was an independence to maintain. He held it and let her be the one to decide when she was done. "You look tired," she said. "I'm all right." She gave him the look she'd been developing since she was 4, the one that said she was not taken in by people who said they were all right when they were not. "Did you give someone your coat again?" He laughed. It came out uneven at the edges, like something that had been compressed for a long time and finally found an opening. Lily smiled at the sound of it. He told her the story: the bench, the cold, the coat, the folder, the chair, the long afternoon, the hallway, the man who sat down in the chair Marcus had been sitting in all day and read every page of the letter without skimming. Lily listened with her whole face, the way she always listened to his stories, tracking him carefully. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "So you helped her," she said slowly. "And she told her son, and her son helped us." Something like that. She considered this. Her fingers were loose around his. "Maybe that's how it's supposed to work," she said. "Maybe it goes in a circle." Marcus looked at his daughter. The gap gone now, the new teeth straight and even, and her face the face of a person who would be here tomorrow, and the day after, and all the days after that. "Maybe it does," he said. Director Sandra Marsh was placed on administrative review the following week. The review found a pattern in how patient assistance files had been managed in her division. Timelines misrepresented, discretionary criteria applied selectively, appeals routed into delays that had no procedural basis. She was not in that office by the end of the month. Drea requested a transfer to the patient advocacy department 3 days after the review began. She was granted it without question. Over the next 4 years, she personally guided more than 200 families through the assistance process. She returned every call. She read every update to every file. She never forgot the Tuesday afternoon she had looked back at her monitor instead of speaking. Eleanor Caldwell had the coat folded on the arm of a chair in her living room when James came to visit that weekend. She had washed and pressed it herself, which her housekeeper considered unnecessary and which Eleanor considered the minimum courtesy. James sat across from her with his coffee and looked at the coat and then at his mother. "You knew he needed help," he said. "You could have told me right away. Given me the name from his badge the moment you got in the car." "I could have," she agreed. "But you didn't." Eleanor looked at the coat for a moment, the way she sometimes looked at Harold's photograph. Not with sadness exactly, but with the steady regard of someone taking stock of what mattered. "He didn't give me his coat because he wanted something," she said. "He did it because I was cold, and he was the kind of man who notices when someone is cold. If I had pulled out my phone and started making calls while he was still sitting beside me, I would have turned it into a transaction. Something he did in order to receive something back." She set down her cup. "He deserved better than that." James looked at his mother for a long moment. "So you waited until the car was moving," he said. "I waited until the car was moving," Eleanor said. "And then I called you." James said nothing for a moment. Outside, the afternoon light was going pale and thin. "You found him in good condition?" Eleanor asked. It was not a question about Marcus's health. "He was in chair number 3, James said. "He'd been there since 8 in the morning. He was still thanking the people who were turning him away." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, her expression had the particular quality of a woman who had hoped for something and found it confirmed. "Yes," she said. "That sounds like him." Marcus went back to work Monday. He wore the coat. It fit the same as before. He picked Lily up from school that afternoon and she ran out without her backpack, zipped all the way, which he noticed and did not address immediately. And she launched herself at him in the parking lot without warning, which nearly knocked him sideways, and he held on. On the drive home, she watched the street from the window for a while. Then, "Dad, that lady on the bench, Eleanor, when you gave her your coat, did she know she could help you?" He thought about it. He thought about the way Eleanor had watched him walk away, the focus in her eyes, the careful way she had listened, like she was keeping something safe. "I don't think she knew exactly," he said. "I think she just noticed, and then she did what she could." Lily looked out the window. "That's what you do," she said. Not a compliment, exactly. More like a fact she was filing away, the kind a child files when she is building her understanding of how the world works, and she wants to get it right. Marcus kept his eyes on the road. The ledger was always open. He understood that now in a way he hadn't been able to name before. Every entry counted. You never knew which one would matter, which one would come back around, which coat draped over which stranger's shoulders on which cold morning would one day close a gap you didn't know could be closed. Sometimes the ledger looked like a folder and a plastic chair, and a photograph of a 9-year-old girl with a heart that was finally, at last, going to be all right. Sometimes it looked like a bench, and a cold morning, and a man who almost walked past, and didn't. Thank you for staying until the balance was restored. The people who watch to the end are the ones who understand why the ledger matters. If this story stayed with you, the videos on your screen right now are ready to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, the ledger has your name. Hidden Ledger. Every account settles.